Okay, and then there's a couple of more important concepts for this. The first one is comprehensible output. So this came from Meryl Swain, who is in Canada, who did a lot of work with Francophone children in immersion schools. And what she essentially said was, you can do as much comprehensible input as you want, but if you don't push the children or the students and second language learners, adults as well, to create accurate outputs, it also won't restructure the system. Okay, so it's not just that you need comprehensible input to become intake, but you also have to push the learner to output that input in order for it to become as accurate as possible. If you don't, she says, you are more likely to end up with a pigeonized variety of the language. So this is one of the arguments for the idea that if you do a study abroad program, if you go to Italy to learn Italian, in addition to immersing yourself in Italian and going to the restaurants and talking to people, you should also take classes, right? Because the idea is that the classes will encourage pushed output, which is as accurate as possible. And if you are just using the output that will be accepted, you know, sort of me, Tarzan, you, Jane kind of output that native speakers tend not to correct you on, you will never get that pushed accurate output. So that's the absolute hypothesis for the reason that we should, and in fact, studies have shown, a number of studies now, I'm a huge believer in this, that it is in fact true that you will, if you take classes as well, you will become a more accurate user of the language in the same amount of time. Mark is nodding his head a lot. This you believe?
Yes.
You believe? Yeah, I believe.
Just because I tried it
the
other way and it didn't.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's true, and I think it can work. My Hungarian, I mean, you know, I could show up and I could do whatever, but I knew it was embarrassingly pigeonized language that I was producing. And then, of course, if you know that, that can then push into this non-language factors, right? Where I knew that I was producing pigeonized language. I didn't care if it was at the food market, but, you know, if I was trying to talk with other people, with somebody that I liked, whatever, then I would be very anxious about using the language, and then I would be demotivated, you know, that whole vicious circle that we talked about. So the second is feedback, and this is what is this idea of negotiation, right? The whole point of negotiation means you're getting some kind of feedback on what it is that you're saying. And a lot of the time, we don't get that when we talk to native speakers or non-native speakers, come to that. We do a lot of what we call let it pass principle, which means we let it pass and we say, didn't quite get that, but moving on, can't have been that important. And the second, so wait, we do, yeah, let it pass. We also do the back channel thing, where we just, again, it's a version of letting it pass, right? We just sort of pretend we understand by mirroring our interlocutor. So feedback can be explicit. So in the case of these things we just saw, this was explicit feedback, right? He was saying, well, actually, no, it's interesting because the Japanese wasn't giving particularly explicit feedback. In the case of the Silviana TV, the non-native speaker was giving no feedback, right? So that's why they had no idea what they were both talking about. If you look at 360, you'll see the feedback model, which is essentially, you know, negotiation, feedback leads to recast. So the big thing is interaction. Then you've got these, what do they call them when they're
Venn diagram.
a Venn diagram, thank you. Negotiation and recast. Recasts mean you recast it, you restate it again, you rethink it. So, and that provides attention, or what we call the noticing hypothesis, and then that creates learning, right? But that feedback in the middle is a critical source of that, right? And the idea of negotiated feedback, so in that case it's explicit feedback, is it provides a kind of negative evidence, right? So it's clear that somebody didn't just understand what you said, because now they're trying to negotiate the meaning with you, right? So this, the one with the, I forget what page it was, but the one with the preservatives and additives one, where the native speaker persists in explicit feedback until they understand. So essentially what researchers have moved on to say is it provides an opportunity for learners to test out hypotheses, and it's these hypotheses that they're testing out that restructure their internal grammar. Okay. Oh, sorry, I meant to have you look at page 361. So this is the idea of negative evidence. So you start with negotiation or other types of correction that are negative, essentially explicit negative evidence. Then the learner notices the error, searches input, finds the correct input or doesn't find the correct input, and then hopefully confirms through continued negotiation what the correct input is. That is then supposed to create the internal restructuring of the system eventually. But without that kind of process, interactionists believe you're not really going to get anywhere. Okay? So if we look at the examples on 371 now, 371. Hypothesis testing, I'm not going to make us read this whole thing. But it's essentially again, it's from Meryl Swain, and it's a lesson from French and English where they're trying to work out what the conjugation should be, and they push and push and push until they get the right conjugation. And at that point is when we hope that you're beginning or you're on some way to restructuring your internal system. All right. I think this is pretty much the last thing we're going to look at. So the last thing, so there's a lot in this chapter, and what I've done is take the stuff that I need you to know. So the final thing is the importance of prompted feedback in an instructed environment. Okay, so feedback in naturalistic data is where the feedback is happening, you know, in the real world. And I don't know about your own experience, but in my experience, the guy with the additives and preservatives is not common. Like, they just give up after a while, because it's too hard to have that sort of going back again and back again. So they just give up and you keep moving forward. So most of the work on feedback and interactionist method has been in an instructed environment, because of course then you can control the feedback that you give. So we can look at these examples of feedback from, well, we don't need to look at them all, but basically clarifications, repetitions, metalinguistic clues, elicitations, and recasts. So, where are the examples that I was looking for? I might actually have the wrong. I think I've got the wrong page. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Wrong page entirely. That page should read 365. Okay, so this is prompted feedback in the classroom. And this is Lister and Ranta. Anybody that's interested, Hilal is actually doing her dissertation on this very thing.
Which part?
She is looking at Lister and Ranta's framework of feedback, and she's trying to connect successful or unsuccessful feedback with smiling. So in other words, if the teacher smiles when they give you feedback, is the learner uptake more than if the teacher doesn't smile when they give them feedback? Because your intuition would be what?
Smiling is good.
Your intuition would be a nice smiley person giving you some feedback would make you feel good, right? So far, it's not working particularly well, I don't think. Right now, it's kind of a crapshoot as to whether they smile or not, is my understanding, but we need to wait for all of Hilal's data before we look at that. So these are the recasts and prompts in a language classroom. This is specifically about prompted feedback in an instructed environment now, rather than in any kind of data. So clarification requests. You see that ladybug. Is this Spanish? Le 12.28.365. Is that Spanish?
French.
Oh, that's French. Right.
Close enough.
Close enough. Okay. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, okay. And then repetition, la chocolat, le chocolat. Okay. Then, oh, yeah, because, of course, this is all from Canada. Metalinguistic cues. Parce qu'elle cherche son cas, because she is looking for her card. Pas son card, not her card. Sa card. Okay. So metalinguistic cues means you're focused on in this case, the gender marker. So not the meaning of the word or anything, but the gender marker. And then elicitation, where does the pet live? Où est-ce que ça vit? Dans la maison, in a house. Attention, careful, dans une maison, right? So these are all particular kinds of prompted feedback. So there are a number of different lines of research within those areas, and it's interesting. The reason Hilal picked it was because no one currently in English in ESL classrooms had put together this idea of feedback, which is what language system? Morphosyntax. So morphosyntactic error correction with non-verbal gesture. Okay, so she's basically saying, would any of these things, particularly recasts, be improved by that? Now, recasts is the final thing that's on the chapter here, and that's considered to be most important for adults. Children are really bad at recasts. So an example of a recast is on page 367. 12.33. So the learner says how many sisters you have. The native speaker says, how many sisters do I have? I have one sister. So a recast is when the native speaker recasts it in the correct form. Okay? And the idea is that you hope that the learner notices. Well, one thing we know is that kids don't notice. Kids, when they're learning, seem not to respond well to recast, but adults do seem to respond to recasts. So that's another thing that she's looking at. If you recast it looking meaningfully and smiling, does that seem to be a recast that they pick up, as opposed to if you don't look like you care at all? Okay, and that's really all I need you to understand from this chapter. There is more in it. This chapter goes on and on and on, but and you're welcome to go on and on and on. But as long as you've got this stuff, you're in good shape. Any questions? Okay, let me see if you have any questions now, because this is your discussion prompt. Did we put it up? Can we put it up? Thanks. I didn't remind you. So describe the meaning of the different kinds of feedback prompts typically given in the classroom, and at least one example of each that you've not taken from the text. Okay. So it's basically to make sure that you understand the difference between recast, clarification requests, repetitions, metalinguistic clues, and elicitation. Okay. If you can think of one that's your own, that would be great. If you can think of one that you've used in a classroom or other people have used on you, that would be great. But otherwise, I just need a little description of what that is, and then an example that you've come up with. All right. Any other questions? So what do you think of this input-output interaction thing?
I like it. I think it's very important.
Do you see how it generated originally from Krashen's input hypothesis?
Yeah, and it's getting much closer to communicative language methods.
Yes, well, so of course, communicative language teaching takes its theoretical stuff from the model of communicative competence. And who did the model of communicative competence? Does anyone remember? Michael Canali and Merrill Swain. And who did we just do? Merrill Swain. So the Canali and Swain were the two that put together. So that's an excellent and astute observation, Diego, because it is the same people. Yeah. Yeah, to be honest, I'm with it, down with it too. I realized that if I'd done much more explicit work, even if it wasn't in the classroom, if I'd really done much more explicit work with Hungarian, I would have done a lot better. But instead, I don't know if I was like you, Mark, but I just sort of got by, basically.
I couldn't find a tutor.
Yeah. You did fine.
No, I couldn't find a tutor.
You couldn't find a tutor, right?
There just weren't a lot of people teaching.
Yeah. No, well, I was there in '89. No one wanted me to speak Hungarian. Everyone wanted me to speak English. I'm sure you might have been in the same. I mean, people were like, "Why are you learning Hungarian? Hungarian is terrible." And I'm like, "So I can buy some food, the right kind of food." All right, so let's talk about your final data set, and then we're calling it a day. Okay, so data set 3 is due, and that's supposed to say next Monday. I don't know, sorry. It's due next Monday, which is whatever date that is. Suppose you got from now till next Monday to do it, okay? And when you look at it, what you want to think about is input, feedback, and negative evidence, or big hint, lack of negative evidence. Okay. So this is all on your, I'm going to show you the data set. It's already up for you in DocShare. And this is Spanish, but don't get, distracted and start telling me lots of things about Spanish that I'm not interested in. Make sure you answer the questions, right? They give you some background in Spanish, and they give you the background that you need to make sense of the data. This is, in fact, a conversation with a native speaker. There's two sets of data, as usual. One with an adult and one with a child. And notice the learning environment. What does that mean?
Context.
Yeah, what does that mean, naturalistic?
It means it's not a classroom setting.
Good. It's not instructed. And that's important, because we've just been talking about what tends to happen in instructed settings, right? That we get this feedback. So you want to be looking to see if you get similar kinds of similar kind of feedback in this. So let's look at the first one together. A is the Spanish speaker. Why don't we read it? Can you read it from here? Yeah, okay, so let's have Alberto is Diego, and Mark, you can be my native speaker.
Yeah, we would have to move slightly closer.
Oh, too far away?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right, I left my glasses in my car.
Oh, sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to. I could have done it.
It's okay.
Right.
Who's native?
You are.
Okay.
No, that's not you. You're not native.
Boy.
Is a boy.
Yeah, is that a good sentence or a bad sentence?
Good.
Good. Okay. Is a dog?
Is a dog. Good.
Good. This apple.
Okay, that's good. We only need to do this first one. All right. What strikes you about that?
It's not a very good sentence.
Okay. What's the input that's coming from the native speaker?
Giving them pidgin English.
Right. And why would Alberto think that that should be a good sentence?
Because it was given to him by the native speaker.
Right. And why might that fit in with his idea of what language is? Big hint. Go back up there.
After that's
Right? Yeah. Yeah. So basically, he's being led up the garden path, right? So you get lots of different examples. You've got 2 questions for Alberto. Then 2 questions, I think 3. Oh, no, sorry. You've got questions for Alberto and questions for Chio. Then you get some diagrams this time to work through. And you get question 3, couple more diagrams, question 4 and 5. So you've got 5 questions totally, okay? So it's actually, I hate to say this because I don't want to get in trouble with you all telling me that it's really complicated, but this one is not. I mean, I started you hard and I'm ending you soft. So, because I know you're all exhausted. So this should actually, especially now we've gone through this, so I do hope people have waited to watch the whole tape. This should actually be pretty straightforward for you. If it is not pretty straightforward, then go ahead and email me at any time on Virtual Office or individually, and pop it in the Dropbox next Monday. Anything? Questions, comments, trauma? Done. You are done.